everyone, thanks for joining us for our webinar on moving to France and buying a French property. I'm Karen Tate, I'll be your host for the next hour. For the past 20 or so years, I've been the editor of French Property News, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times. I'm joined by our panel of experts who are all eagerly waiting to answer your questions. If you have any questions during the webinar, there's a box to the right. So now I shall pass you over to our panelists and they shall introduce themselves. So Joanna, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Joanna Leggett from the Leggett family, the International Real Estates. We cover the whole of France. We've been running since 1998. So we've got a wealth of experience. We sell all types of properties and obviously have clients from all sorts of nationalities, all across France, from Brittany, the Alps, down to the south of France, etc. So hopefully we'll be able to help you with any questions.
That's lovely. Thanks, Joanna. And Sharon?
Hi everybody, I'm Sharon Revol. I'm a mortgage broker at Cafpi. We have an international team of specialist mortgage brokers that are able to deal with non-resident and international clients, expat clients, assisting in finding finance in France or abroad for your French property purchase. So I look forward to hopefully answering some of your questions this evening and hearing everybody else's answers.
Thanks, Sharon. And Paulette?
Hi, I'm Paulette Booth. I'm the co-founder and director of Agence AXA International. We're a specialised English-speaking agency covering the whole of France to help you with all your insurance needs and also to open an AXA bank account for you. So all my staff are English speakers and yep, clients from all over the world, or English if they need or want an English-speaking service.
Thanks, Paulette. And Tracy?
Yeah, hi everybody, great to be here this evening. My name is Tracy Leonetti and I'm a relocation expert. I'm based in the south of France and I've been here for 30 years. I'm here tonight to answer questions on moving, living and business in France. And our aim at LBS really is to help you with a smooth integration from a paperwork perspective. So it often starts with a residency and relocation planning meeting to really look at your project from A to Z and make sure it's viable and answer those key questions that you have. But of course, tonight looking forward to answering any questions you have to help you make that next step, really.
Thank you. And Amanda?
Oh, hi everybody. My name is Amanda.Johnson. I'm a partner at the Spectrum FA Group and we've been going since 2003. And we offer regulated financial advice, specialising in tax and wealth planning. And I've got lots of colleagues throughout France and here to help. So yeah, thank you for inviting me today.
Thanks, Amanda. And Jonathan?
Hi, good evening everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jonathan. I'm a currency dealer for Lumon, international payment specialist, as well as a thorough understanding of the French property buying process. I've handled the currency side of those transactions for 15 of our 20 years of trading. I'm also very interested in the FX markets and currency, and I handle a lot of our company reports. I once featured on the BBC News talking about Brexit with Clive Myrie, so one of my accolades. One of the things I like to do in these webinars is actually find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So you should see a poll on your screen just asking about when you might be beginning to look at property over in France. So thank you very much, audience, if you can have a look at that. You might be looking now. You might not be planning to do this for a little while. Of course, buying property overseas doesn't happen overnight, and it's quite helpful just to get a bit of an understanding of your timescales there, just so we can try and present some useful information relating to those timelines. So thank you very much everyone who has answered that poll. I'm going to launch one more just in terms of the financial aspect of all of this, when you might be financially in a position to put forward an offer. Again, buying a property doesn't happen overnight, and when we're talking about the currency, which is what Lumon's concerned with, you can be talking about daily fluctuations. So with a French property taking anything from 2 to 3 months from sort of initial compromis de vente stage to the actual acte de vente, to the actual completion, of course you can get a lot of currency movement in that time. So again, it's quite helpful for us to understand your financial situation. Thank you very much everyone who's answered that poll. And then one more, just relating to your audience, where you're joining us from. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, the French buying process will be absolutely the same, but there can be little nuances depending on where you're from relating to banking and other important factors. So looks like a strong majority from the UK as we expect, but also many clients joining us from America and other parts of Europe. So we'll certainly make sure we're keeping all the information as relevant as possible for those potential buyers. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. So let's get started on the questions. We have a buying one for Joanna. Sandy Lewis, who's in Canada, has asked, are you sellers or buyers agents, and what services do you provide and what are costs? And Joanna Charlotte from Belgium wants to know how the Leggett agency works in terms of giving advice if she's uncertain about which region to look at.
Okay, so there's a lot of answers there. Firstly, yes, we work for both the buyers and sellers. It's quite different in France. Usually you'd have somebody that was working for the seller, and the same with the solicitors. Generally speaking, you'd have a notaire that deals with both the buyer and the seller, because they're more like tax collectors, you know, getting the stamp duty, etc., stuff like that. So we work on behalf of both. Obviously, a good reason for using an agency as a buyer is, particularly if you're an international buyer, the process is quite different to what it is in the UK, and it's quite different to what it is internationally as well. And there's also the language barrier, particularly if you're buying in rural France. You know, you're going to be dealing with some very old patois speakers or old French farmers that might be selling their French farmhouse. So it's usually, so we try to help to sort of bridge the gap, bring people together, negotiate on both parties. With regards to fees, it can be either the vendor pays the fee or the buyer pays the fee. That generally is sort of sorted out when we take on the property. Sometimes we'll add the fee on. At the end of the day, you're going to be paying the same price for the house. It just depends on whether the buyer or the seller pays. And there's different advantages. If you were looking at getting a mortgage, for example, it would be better that the vendor pays the fees, because the price of the property would be higher, or it would look higher for your borrowing potential. So there's lots of disadvantages and advantages. But at the end of the day, the agency works on your behalf. We do conveyancing and stuff like that as well. So the role is quite different to what it is in the UK, for example. It's a complete hand-holding service, whereby we'll do all of the marketing for the vendor, which is free of charge, and we'll do all of the arranging itineraries and, you know, giving you information and bringing me on to the next question. Yes, we do help with location. I think a lot of people don't realise how large France is. It's the biggest country in Western Europe. So it's huge, and one region to another can be totally different. We have a sales support team in head office, and we also attend the exhibitions. We've got the France show coming up in January, where you can come and have a chat with us and we can talk about areas. But generally speaking, we'll have a good chat with you. We'll see what your criteria is. You know, do you want the weather to be really hot, or do you need it to be a bit cooler? Do you need facilities like hospitals and location, things like that? What's your budget? Because France varies quite massively depending on where you are. So really the initial thing would be to have a really good chat with us, tell us what your needs are, then we could recommend areas to you if you need to get backwards and forwards from the UK or things like that, or from the States, or for wherever you might be living. And that would be the starting point. We also have a lot of information. We have the Leggett magazine, and we have a lot of information on our website. But the starting point would be to get in touch with us, and then we'll take it. It's a complete hand-holding service from start to finish, whether you're selling or buying. I hope that helps.
That's great. Thanks, Joanna. Let's have a mortgage question now for Sharon. William Arbuckle says, can you explain the process for obtaining a mortgage for a holiday home in France when you don't actually live in France or Europe?
Yes, certainly. So the process really is pretty much the same, but there might be some differences depending on where you actually do live. So you've said not in France or not in Europe. So there can be differences whether we can do things fully electronic or if we have to use paper, but generally everything can be done at a distance. When I say paper, I mean like physical paper mortgage offers rather than electronic mortgage offers. So the actual process would be, first of all, to pre-qualify, ideally before you find a property, and that way you know how much your budget is, the sorts of mortgages that would be available to you, your deposit required, etc. Then you would find a property, make an offer, sign a compromis, a purchase contract, etc. Fully apply for the mortgage. So in France, we don't have credit reports or credit checks like in other countries. So we will send you a full list of documents to provide, everything such as your last 3 months bank statements, last 3 months pay slips, last 3 years tax returns, etc., proof of deposit. Then we submit the full application back to the bank. Once you've found a property, and they then review the application. Depending on the bank, depending on where you buy, etc. There are so many variables. It's not an easy question to answer quickly. They will then ask you to have a medical or life insurance, depending if that's a requirement of the mortgage. The majority of the times it will be. And then they make the final decision of the on the mortgage. Sometimes they may wish to have a valuation done on the property, not all the time. So we kind of factor that in. From beginning to the end of the mortgage application process takes about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on what time of year we are. And then you get issued a mortgage offer. At the same time, we need to ensure that you have a bank account to service the mortgage. So Paulette can normally help if it's not a requirement with the bank that gives you the mortgage. And then once you have your mortgage offer, you have a cooling off period, which is for 10 days. And then you can accept and return the mortgage offer to the bank. And then you can complete. So that's the process in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sharon. Well answered in such a short space of time. We have a banking one. So Paulette, Will Metcalf from the UK wants to know, how do I open a bank account and can I get all mail sent to the UK? I presume he means his banking mail.
Yeah, so with AXA Bank, we can actually open the bank account as soon as you've got what's called an economic interest in France. So for most people buying a property, that economic interest starts with once you've signed the compromis de vente. So we can start the bank account opening at that point. 2 different processes depending on whether you can have your cards and everything sent to a French address or an overseas address. It's not a problem at all to have the correspondence address to be overseas, outside of France, that's fine. But the process just takes a little bit longer, and we just require proof of address for not only the property in France, which is your compromis de vente, but we also need proof of address for your address in the UK, say, utility bill, gas, water, electricity. The process, if you don't have a French phone number, it's quite an old-fashioned kind of paper-based application, which we then submit up to the bank on your behalf, and it takes up to about 10 days for that account to be opened. Whereas if you have a French phone number, the account can be opened on the bank account open meeting. So it's absolutely possible, and you can, if you move over when you buy the property, we can change the correspondence address to the French property. If it's not your main property, we would always recommend really that you keep the correspondence address as where you actually live, because if things are delivered or a letter from the bank, it can be sitting on your doormat for a long time if it's a second home. So in a nutshell, yes, not a problem at all. The process just takes about 10 days rather than being fairly instant, but yeah, really easy to do.
That's good to hear. Thanks, Paulette. You don't want an important letter from the bank sitting there unopened, do you?
Yeah, although most things are digital now, we've gone quite paperless. So.
Yeah, that is true. Okay, so one for Tracy now. Vanessa Stewart asks, can I live in France on a 1-year visa and work remotely, full or part-time, for a non-French company?
So Vanessa, that's a really good question. Thanks for asking that one. And the short answer is no. Working remotely for a non-French company is not compatible with a visitor's visa. Basically, in France, there is no such thing as like a nomad visa. I know we hear a lot about it, you know, working remotely, especially with technology nowadays, we can work from anywhere. But effectively in France, from a legal perspective, if you are working in France, even remotely, it's classed as working, and therefore you need to have the appropriate working visa. But there are options, obviously. So as an example, your company could send you over to France to work remotely for them as a detached salaried person. That we work a lot with people doing that because they want to come across work part-time or full-time for a UK employer. So your employee would basically request a work authorization. Generally speaking, it's for a maximum of 3 years, however, so it depends if it's a project for full-time or just, you know, for a year or two. Once your company gets that work authorization, once you come to France with your visa, because you apply for your visa with your work authorization from the UK, and of course, again, we can manage all of that with you and for you. You get into France and then you request the residency card for a salaried person. So generally speaking, obviously lots of documents needed. It takes 3 to 4 months. You generally do that for maximum 3, so it could be straight for 1 year, then renewable, or for a 3-year contract to start with. Of course, what people don't think about on this is working for an overseas employee means that the overseas employer would need to be responsible for your healthcare and retirement in France, which costs quite a bit of money, so it's not always the best solution. So another example, if you want to work in France remotely, would be to set up an independent activity where you can then charge any overseas companies for that activity for them. So that would be like a liberal business visa that you can apply for, which makes it a little bit easier on the company. They don't have all of that problem with getting the work authorization. So I know it's a bit long-winded, it's a bit complicated, I know, so I'm sorry, Vanessa, but do reach out if you need some support with that, and I'm happy to take that offline with you.
Thanks, Tracy. So Amanda, we have a financial question here, and I love the wording of this question. Mandy Body says, we are buying a house with Leggett, hooray, and using Lumon, hooray. What social charges will we pay on private income of £10,000?
Okay, well, first of all, congratulations on buying a house with Leggett's and using Lumon. You're in safe hands there. So social charges on private income, that will depend on what the private income is. So for example, if the private income is a pension, so let's say it's a private pension or a company pension from the UK, then that would the social charges will be in the region of sort of 6.8 to 9.2-ish. Okay, it's difficult to exactly as it will be on what your other income was as well. So I'm sure that you're not just going to be coming to France just with £10,000, because you might need a little bit more. If the money is, for example, the private income is coming from rental in the UK, then that isn't subject to social charges here, so you need to bear that in mind. And finally, if it's come from investment income, then it could be the social charges around about 17.2. But if it is from investment income, there are things that you can do to make your investment income more tax efficient over here, and we could really knock the social charges and taxes sort of really down. So Mandy, if you want to get in touch with me, I can work out what your particular scenario would be based on what your income is coming from. So it's not just it's definitely this, it would be between this and that. So hope that's okay.
Thanks, Amanda. It sounds like, as with so many aspects of moving to France, that it is a situation where it's best to seek professional advice on something like that. Okay, brilliant. Let's move on to a foreign exchange question for Jonathan. Dorothy Philpott says, is it best to buy forward currency, spot currency, or stop loss and limit orders? And for anyone not familiar with foreign exchange, I think that probably sounds like a foreign language. So over to you to demystify.
Okay, thank you for the question. So yes, those are different contract types, the four main FX, foreign exchange contract types you might want to consider. Which is best? Well, the simple answer really there is, what are you trying to do? What do you want to do? Because they've all got slightly different sort of benefits and drawbacks and situations. So of course, we're talking about buying a French property. So each of those contracts would be useful in certain circumstances and situations. So, first step with Lumon, you register totally free of charge. Within a few minutes, you're set up and you're ready to trade. So if you're buying a French property, as we mentioned, you have the compromis de vente, the initial sales agreement. You've got a deposit to pay within 10 days, typically, of that being signed, around 5 to 10%. So that's a fairly immediate payment you're going to be making. For that, you're going to want to do the spot trade. So the deal is done on the spot there and then. Settlement's due within 2 working days of agreeing the rate on the phone or online. So you pay the money, the deal is fully settled, and then that euros are paid for. They're ready to be paid out. So that's the spot deal. As I say, for your deposit, you're going to need to get the money there quite quickly. Now, the question touched on a forward contract. That a lot of clients do come to me who've done a bit of research online or read some articles about this. And the forward contract sounds quite cool and it's really useful. So it's basically an agreement to buy currency for payment in the future. As we mentioned earlier, buying a French property can take 2 to 3 months. So if you agreed something today, the compromis de vente, you're active on, let's just say it's going to be the end of December, trying to complete before the end of the year. So say it's £100,000 worth of currency. You could buy £100,000 with us, but only give us a small deposit now, again around 5 to 10%, whatever's agreed, and you wouldn't actually have to pay the balance on that until December, the end of December, whatever date you agree. So the advantage there is you're locking in current rates. By the way, rates are very good at the moment. We hit on Friday just gone the highest point on pound euro levels since April 2022, a 2.5-year high. So we've had a lot of people looking at these contracts for that reason. So yes, the point is you can lock in the rate, but you only have to pay 5 or 10% now, and you'd pay that balance in December when you actually need to pay out the euros. So the advantage there is you get to actually keep the money in your bank account, maybe earning some interest on it. Perhaps you've got the money invested, but you're minimizing the currency risk. Of course, we've got some important events coming up. The budget, 1 week today. You've got the US election on the 5th of November. That's less than 2 weeks away. So these could be quite important market events where there is speculation. We could see some market movements around those events. So you might not be comfortable with that. So you could use the forward contract to lock in. You're guaranteeing the rates, whatever happens with the budget or the US election, you're not going to change the value of your property. It's going to be a fixed amount. So those are the two main contracts really. The spots deal, you pay for everything now and it's ready to go straight away, and then the forward contract, you're fixing for payment in the future, and hopefully you can see the different situations where those would become necessary. Now the limit order, that's where you automatically buy currency at a higher rate. So as I say, we've just hit a 2.5-year high. You might think it's going to get even better, and there's certainly some potential, as I say, with some of the things that are coming up. So you tell us the rate that you'd like to buy at. So it's a higher rate than is currently achievable. We can set an automatic order at that price. If the rate gets there, we'll automatically buy it for you. Sometimes daily market movements can be many cents. You can have literally in the space of a few seconds, the rate just ticks up. And by the time we've even called a client, or sent you an email to let you know what's happened, it kind of dropped back down. So this guarantees that rate if it gets there even for just a second. So that's very handy in those situations. And then a stop loss is the opposite of a limit order. So it's basically protecting what you have. So it means if the market falls, so say the budget coming up, something unexpected happens, sterling takes a bit of a dive. If you've put one of these orders in to say, Jonathan, I don't want to get less than whatever the rate is, you know, whatever you've budgeted on perhaps for the actual cost of your property. If the market falls, you're guaranteed that price. Even if it goes lower, doesn't matter, you're still getting that level. So hopefully that shows some of the different scenarios where those contracts would be useful. But like we sort of said with some of the other panelists, best thing to do, Dorothy, is get in touch and we can talk you through all of the implications of these contracts. Also share with you some of the forecasts that are out there on the rates with some of these important events coming up. And it really does come down to the client. Some people are very defensive and sort of want to protect what they have. They don't want any risk whatsoever, and that's fine. You know, you don't want any nasty surprises when you're buying the property. Others are a bit more speculative. You know, they think the rates are going to go much higher, and we've got options for them as well. So yeah, all about a phone call with us. We can explain how it works and what's good, and then it's your decision.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, it's very good for British buyers at the moment with the pound at such a high rate, and good to know that you can lock those rates in to mitigate any risk against currency movements.
And
So
I'll just jump in as well, Karen. So it's good for the American buyers that we've got on the call as well, because the dollar's very strong against the euro at the moment as well. And it's a very interesting time, as I say, with the budget coming up, the US election. Could be a busy couple of weeks, so but it's good at the moment.
Fantastic, good for British and American buyers. That's very good news. So over to Joanna now. We have a question from America from Sherilyn Baylor. She says, my husband and I are nearly 70. Is it too late for us to purchase a property? Would it be better to just lease a property? And I have to say, nearly 70 is young, so I do hope the answer is going to be no. It's not. It's never too late. Over to you, Joanna.
Well, 78 is the new 60 these days, so it's very, very young. Definitely. And it really depends. I mean, obviously, if you were looking at getting a mortgage, which I imagine that you're not, then obviously the mortgage term would be a lot shorter, if at all. But if you're looking at, you know, if you want to invest in France and you want to live there and you want to buy a property and you know, live in that, then there isn't an age limit. Obviously, you're going to have to prove your income, that you've got enough income to live there in order to get the visa, but that will be a question for Tracy. But yeah, there's absolutely, it makes no difference. You've got to think about inheritance laws, obviously, because if you know, as later in life, you have to look at that when you're buying the property, to who's going to inherit that property when you leave. Or alternatively, yes, of course, you can rent. You know, you can rent a property and then you're much more free to leave or to go back if you didn't like it or whatever. But there's no age restriction whatsoever. So, you know, it depends what you want to do. If you want to invest, and obviously depending on the area, the property might go up, so you're gaining more money from it, which you obviously don't do when you're renting, because, you know, it's just dead money at the end of the day. You can do what you want to the house that you buy, whereas you can't, obviously, if you're renting a property. But it's definitely not age specific. I mean, I think I had a client who was 86 who bought a mill that needed renovation, and so you know, he was never too young. He had a bit of a younger wife, but they were still together and still renovating, and the mill's still going to this day.
That's lovely to hear. So never too late. That's good.
No.
So another question from the US, from Vanya Gonzalez, and this one is for Sharon. How can I qualify for a loan, and do I have to pay a down payment?
Okay, qualifying for a loan and down payment. So we have lending laws in France, which actually stipulates what the lenders can and can't do in terms of mortgage lending. So first of all, you would have to qualify for the mortgage financially. So it would be a case of fitting within the French lending criteria. Basically, one of the criteria, the main criteria here, is what we call debt to income ratio. So qualifying will depend on your age, source of your income, etc. Our mortgages are income based and not asset based. So we have to make sure that you fit a 35% debt to income ratio. So technically what that means is that your monthly debt related outgoings hire purchase agreements, credit cards, loans, mortgages, etc. With the new French mortgage, and no more than 35% of your monthly net taxable income. So that's kind of the affordability criteria. That's going to set out how much you can borrow. We would also then look at where you're buying, what the property is like, whether it's a rental property, a second home. We will have a look at the banks, well, the banks we will look at as a broker, but the banks focus on how much savings you have, what's your assets like. If you're buying a second home, they like to see that you own your main home. If you don't own your main home, they like to see that you have savings left over after purchase. It's very important in the current economic climate for the banks to see that you are a stable bet, so to speak, in terms of paying back the mortgage. In terms of deposit required, down payment, that will depend on where you live today, because different banks will be able to intervene depending on which country you live in. And then each of the banks have their own requirements. As a very minimum, as a non-resident purchaser, we would be looking at 10% down payment on the property price, plus covering all of the purchase costs. So that's the notary fees of 7 to 8%, plus the cost of registering the mortgage, legal charge, etc. So generally we say another 10% kind of to cover all of the fees. Most banks will require a minimum down payment of 20%. Some banks may require 40, 50%. Everything then really depends on your profile. They will also look at whether you're salaried, self-employed, company owner. For example, somebody who is salaried living in Europe is going to be easier to finance, so we would be able to get away with a smaller deposit than somebody who is self-employed living in, say, Mexico. Not to say it's not possible, but we're going to ask for more down payment or more security for the banks. So there are lots of different aspects that we take into consideration for the mortgage application in terms of pre-qualification, hence why it's really important to kind of get the information before you apply for the mortgage, before you actually find the property, to make sure that what's required fits with what you're able to do and what you're happy to do. If you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them privately, because everybody's situation is obviously very different. So yeah. Thank you.
Great, thanks Sharon. I mean, it's quite a process, but it is designed to protect the buyer as well as the bank, so that's good. We have a question now on health insurance for Paulette, and it's from Dorothy Philpott, who says, if you are over 65, would you still need medical insurance, or can you apply for an S1 form which is reciprocal with the NHS in the UK?
So that very much depends on your eligibility for the S1, which Tracy would absolutely be able to help somebody with that, with their application for their visa. In terms of the health insurance, if you're eligible for an S1, and assuming this person, Dorothy's looking to move over on a permanent basis, not just kind of a short-term visa, then yes, absolutely, the S1 will give you access to healthcare in France. So you don't necessarily then need the healthcare, like a private individual healthcare when you first move over, because you've got your S1. However, it might take some time, well, it will take a little bit of time to get your social security number set up in France. So you can take a standalone health insurance policy if you wish, but it's not it's not compulsory, it's not a condition of your visa. The S1 then in France will give you that access to the healthcare, but it won't cover all of your costs. What it will do is, yes, in the UK, for example, your healthcare is free. When you move to France, that S1 just gives you the rights as though you're a French resident, which as a rule of thumb, there are more exceptions than rules, but as a general rule, the refund when you go for medical treatment, you're going to get back about 70% from the state, from social security, and the extra 30% is out of pocket. And that's what you then take the mutual top-up health policy for, which covers that top-up, and it's basically it will cover what you're short. But as I say, 70% is a rough guide. There are dental, optical, hearing, things like that have way different refunds, but once you've got your social security number, yes, that's when the mutuelle top-up comes in. When you arrive in France with your FS1, if you're on medication, we always recommend that you try and bring as much medication with you as with a repeat prescription and things like that, because it will take you a few weeks, so to speak, to get your French social security number.
Thanks, Paulette. That's great. Okay, so one for Tracy now. Robert Davis says he lives in New York. He's looking for a rural house in France for summer months. His wife has a EU passport and he doesn't. Does he need a visa?
Okay, good one, Robert. Yes, so looking for your rural house, obviously that's a Joanna question. I'm sure she can help you with that with her team, not a problem. So for traveling with if you're coming into France just for a few months with your wife and you're traveling with her, then you do not need to apply for a visa. Okay, so that's a good thing for you. However, if you decide that you want to stay for a longer period of time in France, then you would need to apply for a visa, but you can apply for it directly in France. The advantage of being married to an EU spouse is that when you are in France and you want to stay in France, so this might be even a better answer for people who are listening to this afterwards, you can apply within France directly, attaching to an EU family member. So you reach out to the local prefecture to do this. There is an online procedure now with the AMF website to do that. It is a bit long-winded and can take about 6 months. So travel would be restricted during going through that process. But yes, Robert, in answer to your particular question, if you're just coming for a few months to benefit from your home in France, then you don't need to apply for a visa from the state.
Okay, thanks for that, Tracy.
You're welcome.
A tax question now for Amanda. Caroline Maxwell says, as an additional rate taxpayer, I'm considering purchasing a holiday home in France, but I'd like to understand the tax liabilities.
Okay, so if you are going to buy a property here, but it's not going to be your main residence, okay, then the only taxes that will apply to you would be the sort of tax foncier, so that's equivalent of sort of council tax or poll tax, if I'm showing my age, so which is sort of by the local tax office, and it's based on what facilities that you have, and so your local Leggett agent will be able to tell you what the tax foncier is. So that's if you're so you're going to use it as a holiday home and you're not going to live here. But one thing you do need to be mindful of is the property will be subject to French inheritance tax. So that's something that's worth speaking to an expert about. So you can speak to your notaire about that, and they can run through a scenario of how much that would be. And that's because although you'd be, in your case, a UK tax resident, your property is a fixed asset, and as such, France would like a bite of the cherry when you've popped your clogs. So even though you might only be using it sort of 4 months a year, your dependents and next of kin will have some a liability here. But again, there's different allowances depending on who you leave the money to. So, and no one is ever taxed 100%. So just a little reminder on that. But your notaire can run through that with you, and they can also make sure that you've got a will. And again, I can work things out on a case by case if somebody wanted to ask me on specifics and stuff. So, but yeah, just for you, if you're just buying it, then, and you're not going to live here permanently, then it's only the tax foncier. No one's going to be having a go at your income or anything like that. You're perfectly safe there.
That's great. Thanks very much, Amanda. So Jonathan, a currency one again from Dorothy Philpott. She said, if I got a call or email from you to transfer money, how would I know if it was genuine? Can a password be set up to combat any fraud, as you hear a lot of that happening? And that's an interesting question, because there is so much in the news about fraud at the moment, isn't there? Scams.
Absolutely. Yeah, very good to sort of have that conversation in such a forum. So yes, I'll certainly run through some of the security aspects of Lumon. We are authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority. That's in the UK, which covers our transactions for clients around the world. We're also authorised by the Bank of Ireland, which covers our operations within the EU. So obviously France is in the European Union, so any transactions happening there, say throughout the rest of the EU, we have the regulator who's authorised us, and we're called an e-money, electronic money institution, and that all relates to how we handle client funds. Funds are held in what we call a segregated bank account. So it's separate from our normal business money accounts, the accounts we might, pay the milkman or, other business expenses. We have special accounts purely for client funds. So any money held in those accounts is actually separate from the business, and were anything to happen to Lumon, your money is kept separate. So that's the sort of regulatory approach. The question was more, I think, about, as you touched on there, Karen, about some of these frauds and interceptions and things that happen. So, well, how do you know if an email from me was genuine? You will actually get my email at the end of this webinar, so you can definitely cross-reference it against that if you wanted to contact me directly. I'm also on LinkedIn. There's other ways you can sort of get in touch with me directly, of course, through any of the panelists who would have my details. We just wanted to be sure, is that definitely your email? I don't actually want to go into too much detail of our actual security processes. I hope that makes sense, because, were a fraudster happen to be watching this, that wouldn't be very clever of me. But I can assure you, we have a number of almost triple verification processes that we go through with bank details. So just to sort of, talk around that. So when a client has funds with us, certainly when we send you our bank details for payment, we sort of triple verify that with you. We may have a phone call. We also have an online login where you can check those bank details. Well, I'll usually suggest to a client to actually send us a test payment first. Obviously with property, you're talking about six-figure sums of money, very daunting. Even if I'm sending my brother £10 on internet banking, you sort of, oh, did that actually get there? Sometimes you're not too sure. So I'll always get clients to actually send a test payment through first of all. You can get really clever and send to the company or whoever you're sending money to a strange amount, like £2.73, and don't tell them what you're sending, and then ask them to confirm what you've sent to them. So we can get quite deep with that. That's to confirm the bank details that we're giving you to pay us. Okay, so you can do a test and it's 100% the right ones. And then we have a similar setup for when you give us bank details to pay to the notaire. As I say, there really are a series of checks and balances we have with, say, a phone call, an online verification. We also have very advanced computer systems that monitor where money is going. We know a lot of the notaires that Leggett and the other panelists work with. I think last year, Lumon transferred funds to about 750 different French notaires. So were anything to come up as new, again, we have separate checks and verifications of that process. And if a client wants us to, as I've said, if you send us, we suggest the test payment, we can on your behalf. As the client, it's your money that we're holding on your behalf. So if you want us to send a test payment to the notaire, we will 100% do that for you. Even if we've sent money to them 1,000 times, if you want us to just send €10 first and you want to confirm the notaire has received that, we will absolutely do that for you. And it'd be the same with money to your French bank, or paying the builder, or buying some furniture from the Lumon account. So absolutely, there's so many things out there nowadays of fraud. We've got some very advanced systems and checks to be one step ahead of the fraudsters. So yeah, very happy to talk that through with any client. It's unfortunately the world we're living in, but we have been in business for 25 years. We've helped literally tens of thousands of people moving money in and out of France very, very securely. So yes, very happy to pick that up offline with anyone with any security questions.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm sure that'll be very reassuring to Dorothy and others on the webinar. So over to Joanna now for a question about property. Julie Hammond says, could you tell me about the buying process when purchasing an apartment rather than a house?
Well, the buying process, Julie, is exactly the same as if you were buying a house. There might be different things that the notary will look at when obviously buying a co-prop, whether it's a, you know, if it's freehold or whether it's in a leasehold building, etc. So it'd be pretty much the same as it is in any country when you're looking at apartments compared to houses. But the buying process is the same. So how it works in France is you go and look for your property, you find the property that you want to buy, you put in an offer for that, and if that offer is accepted, then what's called the compromis de vente, which is the exchange of contracts, is drawn up. Before that can be signed, certain tests have to be done on the property. So whether that's lead, termites, electricity, does the septic tank conform if it's got one, all of those sort of tests, there's 5 in total, have to be done, and they have to be shown to you at the time of signing that compromis de vente. So you're aware of any problems with the property once you've signed, when you sign that. The buyer always signs first, and then it goes to the vendor who signs. The buyer still has get out clauses, or for example, you have a 10-day cooling off period as soon as you've signed that. The vendor doesn't. Once they've signed, they're locked in completely. The buyer will also could put in suspensive clauses, like for example, you wanted to check that you could get planning permission for a pool, or you wanted to convert a barn into habitation. So all of those sort of things, and a mortgage, probably the biggest one, you know, that you put in a mortgage application, and you have to stipulate at the time of the compromis de vente what bank you are going to approach to get that mortgage application from, and the interest, etc. So that's all signed at that time. The good thing for the buyer is that in other countries you can get gazumped, because sometimes you exchange and complete on the same day, whereas in France, once the vendor sign that, he is locked in until right at the end of the sale when you complete. If you, after the 10 days, still going ahead with the property, then you would send your deposit through Lumon, of course, to the notaire, and the notaire would hold that deposit in their holding account until all of the suspensive clauses are met. So if, for example, the swimming pool, the local mayor or the town hall came back and said, sorry, you're next to a church, you won't get permission for the pool, you would be able to pull out of the sale, even if it's 3 weeks down the line, and get your 10% deposit back. So any of those, if all the suspensive clauses are met, you will have a completion date, which is usually around about 3 to 4 months, sometimes longer if there's more people involved. But then you'd come to complete, and then both of you would sign on the same day and hand over the key. So it's very, very straightforward. If you decided, like 2 or 3 months down the line, I don't want to buy this property anymore, then you could be subject to losing your 10% deposit, unless, you know, in certain circumstances, if there was a death or something happened like that, then they would look at each case individually. But generally speaking, you can't just pull out and say, oh, I found another house once the vendor has signed and you've signed. So it's a very safe process in France, and everything is looked at, and you're signing for everything, so you know everything up front. And compromis de vente can, if we have all the paperwork in and all the checks have been done beforehand, you know, you could exchange contracts within a few days of seeing and agreeing the price of the property. So it really depends on, you know, the vendor and what information the agent has. But the good thing is, particularly for a buyer, it's a very straightforward process, and you're protected all the way right until the completion.
That's
but it
great.
will be the same for an apartment or a house. Yeah.
That's really good to hear, reassuring that it's such a safe process. One now for Sharon on loans. It says, I'm self-employed. Will I be able to get a French mortgage?
Yes. As a self-employed person, you will be able to get a French mortgage, providing you meet the criteria. So the criteria, self-employed person would be, the banks would look at your last 3 years tax return. If you're, for example, self-employed in the UK, you'll have your self-assessment. So it won't be your gross figure they will take, it will be your net figure after expenses, and they will consider that to be your income. And then they will take an average of the last 3 years to ascertain what your income is likely to be and if it's stable. If there are big jumps or we see a decline in income over 3 years, then we will probably take the lowest year. We will take an average of just 2 years. We also had COVID not so long ago, unfortunately. So that did affect a lot of people's self-employed income. So if, for example, you're a lawyer and you had better income prior to COVID, then sometimes we can cancel out the COVID year and take your income over maybe a 5-year period, so we get a better average. If you don't have 3 years self-employed income, it's going to be very difficult to get a mortgage, because the banks have to be able to basically prove the sustainability of your income and that it's regular. Depending on your profession, i.e. if you're in a medical profession, we may be able to get away with 2 years books and tax returns, but the majority of banks will require 3 years. So if you haven't got 3 years self-employed tax returns, it's very likely that you're not going to be able to get a mortgage. But if you are in what we call in the kind of legal profession, medical profession, etc., it's still worth speaking to somebody beforehand because it may be possible in your case.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Sharon. That's good to hear.
You're welcome.
A healthcare one now for Paulette. Julie Raymond says, I'm worried about healthcare. Do we need to pay into a healthcare scheme? How do we go about getting our meds? And Stefan Thurauer from Germany wants to know about costs for health insurance.
Okay, so once you're actually in France and you have your social security number, you don't have to have a mutual top up. A lot of people do choose to have one because, especially if you go into a hospital, you know, if you have an operation, things like that, the costs can be quite high. But I think we've got about 64 different levels of mutual. So, you know, there's something for everybody's budget. So the most basic one covers just hospitalization. I would say the 100% is probably your average level. In terms of getting medication, when you first arrive in France, before you've got your social security number, especially for our American clients, they're really quite pleasantly surprised at how cheap or how reasonable it is to actually go to the pharmacy and you know, go and see a doctor. It's going to cost you $26.50. They give you a prescription, you go to the pharmacy. The cost of those medicines are probably going to be a lot less than you're actually expecting. So when you first arrive, yes, bring, as I said earlier, bring, you know, as much medication as you can if you're on medication. But if you do need to buy, you know, while you're waiting to be in the system here, it's really, really quite reasonable. In terms of cost for a top-up mutual, for a kind of mid-range, a good level of cover, to give a guide, we say kind of a 50 euros a month, at 60 euros a month, 70 euros a month, and that's obviously each. If you're a couple, you know, there's quite often offers where you'll get a discount of say 15% if you both take a mutual with say, for example, with, you know, the same company. If you're over 65, there's a discount. If you're self-employed, there's a discount. So there's lots of offers and things. But as a rule, you know, 50 at 50, 60 at 60, 70 at 70 for a good mid-range cover.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Paulette. I've never heard it explained like that. So we've got time just for a few more questions, I think. Tracy, Brian Eels would like to know, do we have to take a French driving test, presumably once he's moved to France?
Okay, well, God forbid if you do, that's all I can say. So Brian, generally, no, you don't. So obviously since Brexit, moving to France has been a bit more complicated, and the driving license situation was extremely messy for quite a while. Thank goodness that has got easier. So the basic rule here for driving license, if you move into France as a permanent resident, is if on your driving license, so the date on it was changed after the 1st of January 2021, so after the transition period finished, so if you've renewed or changed address and it's been issued after the 1st of January 2021 and you come to France, then you need to exchange it for a French one within your first year in France. So that would be within the first year of your visa in France. If it was issued before the end of the transition period, so before the 1st of January 2021, so it's still ongoing, then you can come to France with it and keep driving with it up until 6 months before it expires. I say 6 months before it expires because it takes about 6 months to exchange it. So you come to France, you drive with your driving license, and then you exchange it 6 months before its expiry. So really the only real need to take a driving test would be if you were supposed to exchange it in that first year because of the validity and you forgot to do it, then yes, you would have to take a driving test. And also something to mention as well, which is quite important, is if you have a current UK driving license and you're living in France and it expires, you cannot exchange it in France if it's expired. So you'd have to renew it in the UK before you could exchange it in France. And that gets complicated when you no longer have a property in the UK. So generally, just check the date on it, Brian. Just make sure that it is in those dates that I say. And if you do have to exchange it in the first year. So I say to my clients when we go through a meeting, we look at the date and say, okay, step one, once you've got your visa, then it's healthcare, then it's driving license. So hopefully that's going to help you.
Okay, thanks Tracy. I'd just like to get last couple of questions in. This one is about tax for Amanda. We haven't got much time left, so if you could possibly answer this complicated tax question briefly. It's from Yvonne Miller, and it says, what are the tax rules for leaving your property to your child in a will or signing it over to them?
Okay, I'm going to do this really, really super quickly. Okay, as a parent, you are allowed to leave 100,000 euro equivalent per parent per child. So Yvonne's got one child, 100,000 she can leave in her will, and she can leave all to her child, obviously, but the first 100,000 is tax free. If she wanted to sign it off, she could do so. But if she dies within 15 years, it will just be the 100,000 tax free amount before she starts paying tax will come off the inheritance. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Really quickly. Okay, over to you, because I know we've only got about 3 minutes left. So
no, that's great, Amanda. Thanks. And obviously you can help people if they have more questions on that. So finally, just one last question for Jonathan. How can we keep abreast of changes in exchange rates? Sometimes they change so quickly, other times they don't seem to change at all. And do the tiny 0.00 changes really make a difference when you're buying a home?
Okay, so how do you keep abreast of changes? Talk to me. Registered clients of ours get regular updates on the market, and if we know you're in the market for currency, we can keep you up to date with all these important events where you've got, like we say, the budget, the US election. Throughout the course of a day, you really can sometimes see 1 or 2 cents movement depending on what's happening. So you need a good person on your side, a good currency broker. I've been here 15 years. Some of my colleagues have been here 21 years, helping clients guide them through the market. So that's how you keep up to date. Of course, rates do change quickly. Other times they're a lot flatter. The bottom line is no one knows exactly what's going to happen. No one can totally predict it, but we'll try and give you as much information as possible about what's coming up and when and how the market might react. So it's basically educated gambling. I think that's the best way to point out the currency markets. No one knows exactly what's going to happen, but you can use a bit of insight to try and guess a little bit better than some other directions. And those small differences, they do make small differences in the rate. Does make a big difference. If it's £500 into euros for your holiday money, an extra cent is €5. Not going to make or break your holiday. If you're doing £100,000, that extra cent is €1,000. And as I say, in a day, depending on what's happening, you can have 1 or 2 cents movement. So literally over the course of a day, the value of your purchase, your budget can be changing by thousands. So very important to have a specialist on your side, letting you know what's going on in the market and what might be happening ahead.
Brilliant. And that difference in money can be put towards renovation or going out and enjoying the local restaurants and things. So it's definitely worth taking advantage of that. Okay, so we have run out of time now. We're bang on 7 o'clock. So that's, or 7 o'clock in the UK, I should say. That's it for the webinar this time. The next one will be on the 20th of November. If you'd like to register for that, you'll receive details in an email. You'll also receive a recording of the webinar, which is really handy if you've missed bits or you want to listen to bits again. Apologies that we didn't get time to answer all of your questions, but all our panelists' details are on the screen and they'll be happy to help you, so don't hesitate to get in touch with them. Thank you again for joining us. I'll hand over to the panelists to say their farewells too. So, Joanna?
Yes, thanks for coming along, and do get in touch with us, and whatever we can help. We have a sales support team and we're here to help you with any questions on the buying or selling process. So see you soon.
Thank you. And Sharon?
Yes, thank you. Thank you everybody for attending. It's been a lovely evening. My best advice to take away from this evening is to plan ahead. If you need a French mortgage to purchase, don't hesitate to contact us. We have an expert team of international brokers in place to help you plan in advance to make sure that you're able to buy your dream property in France. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks. And Paulette?
Yeah, thanks for listening and watching, everybody. And don't hesitate to get in touch, and we'll go through and make sure that you understand what you're insured for, not just taking insurance because it was the cheapest one you got. You need to know what you're insured for, and we'll go through all of that and explain the insurance system in France and help you with opening a bank account. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tracy?
Yes, just great to be here this evening. Sorry I haven't got to answer all the questions. I think reiterating what Sharon just said, it's about planning to move to France. It's a big project. Everybody on the panel here this evening, it could be part of that project to make it a smooth transition for you. Here at LBS, we are definitely here to help you with all of those paperwork processes. We've done it for 14 years, so we know what we're talking about. And also, you know, don't be scared to reach out, you know, drop an email, ask a question, and somebody in the team will come back to you for sure.
Thanks. And Amanda?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, just my top tip would be you've got all these amazing specialists. So get in contact with them. We're here to help you, and we're going to make it as smooth as possible. And it's exciting. So happy shopping.
It is indeed exciting. And Jonathan?
Yes, thank you, Karen, for your excellent hosting as well. Thank you to all our panelists and audience for joining us. Just the last currency bits from me. Since the beginning of the year, the pound is buying an extra £100,000, buys an extra 5,000 euros since January the 1st. So best time in 2.5 years to be buying euros with pounds. So that's very good news. Some busy times coming up in the currency markets. So well worth having a chat about that, like the other panelists have said, getting in touch early. And for our American friends, the dollar's not far off a 1-year high against the euro. So from a currency perspective, a very strong time to be buying euros.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. And thanks once again for joining us. Thanks to our panelists for their advice. We hope you found it helpful tonight, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.